The storm rolled over the plains like a living beast, swallowing the sky in a fury of black clouds and endless thunder. Lightning slashed open the horizon, revealing, for the briefest moment, the lonely figure of a woman stumbling across the wet prairie grass. Her breath came in ragged bursts, each step a war against the pain searing her leg. A dark stain spread down the hem of her torn skate, mixing with mud and rain until she could no longer tell where her blood ended and the storm began. Her boots sank with each desperate step, and though the world around her seemed to stretch forever, she whispered to herself, as if the words might summon strength, "Just a little more." But the prairie was merciless. Her body gave way, dropping her to her knees. She dug trembling hands into the earth, trying to push herself back up. The scent of wet soil filled her nose, mingled with copper, reminding her of the gas she'd been carrying since morning. When she lifted her head, the horizon spun. Her vision blurred, and in the distance, she swore she could hear the eerie, rising howl of wolves. She shuddered, alone, injured. With night falling fast, the wilderness felt less like land and more like a predator waiting for her to close her eyes. She pressed her hand against her wound, hissed at the sharp sting, and forced herself forward on hands and knees. Each movement was a crawl against despair. Memories cut through her pain, unbidden. Her father's voice calling out instructions while fixing the wagon axle just 3 days ago, her mother humming softly as she kneaded dough in the cabin back east, her little brother laughing when he tried to chase grasshoppers across the toll fields. That was before the wagon wheel splintered on the rocky trail, before the accident that left her with nothing but broken wood, spilled grain, and a leg torn open by jagged iron. They had been heading west together, a family of hope and fragile determination. Now she was alone, carrying what little she could salvage, praying each day she might find help before her body gave in. A gust of wind tore at her bonnet, sending it into the dark grass. She let it go. What use was a bonnet when rain soaked her hair and plastered it against her pale cheeks? Her breath grew shorter, her throat raw. She tried to rise once more, balancing on her uninjured leg, but the other refused to hold her. Her body crumpled, a sob breaking loose from her chest. She pressed her forehead to the cold, muddy earth and whispered into it, "I'm too injured to walk." The words seemed to vanish, stolen by the storm. Her shoulders shook, and for the first time since the wheel snapped and her world shattered, she stopped trying. Her body trembled, racked with exhaustion. Maybe it would be easier to lie there, let the night claim her. Wolves would come, or the storm would. At least she would not have to fight anymore. And then, through the roar of thunder, came another sound. Not the distant cry of beasts, not the hiss of rain in the grass. Footsteps, heavy, measured, deliberate. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. At first, she thought the storm itself had conjured a shadow, a darker shape against a trembling curtain of lightning. He stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, a rifle slung across his back, his hat dripping with rain. The stranger did not move closer at once. He simply stood, studying her as though he had been watching for some time. His silence was more frightening than the wolves. She tried to push herself back, but the pain in her leg pinned her down. She clutched at the wet grass, eyes darting. Was he a bandit? A drifter? Someone who saw her as nothing more than prey in this lawless expanse? The storm raged between them, thunder cracking like gunfire, yet he remained steady, unflinching. Finally, he took a step forward. Then another. The earth squelched under his boots until he was kneeling beside her, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. She could not read his eyes in the dim light, but the sharp line of his jaw, the quiet power in his movements, told her he was no weak man. Her voice trembled when she spoke. I can't walk." For a long heartbeat, there was nothing. He adjusted the strap of his rifle, rain dripping from his coat. His hand moved, not to draw a weapon, but to press against the mud near her, steadying himself. His voice came low, steady, carrying through the storm like a promise carved from stone. "I will take you home," he said. Then, softer, with a finality that sent a shiver through her, "You're safe now." The word struck her harder than thunder. Safe. She had not heard that word in weeks, not since her family's laughter still warmed the nights. Safe felt impossible, yet his tone left no room for doubt. He reached for her, sliding an arm beneath her shoulders. She stiffened, instinct flaring with fear, but her strength was too thin to resist. Gently, far more gently than his rugged form suggested, he lifted her into his arms. Her head fell against his chest, hearing the slow, steady rhythm of his heart beneath the soaked fabric of his shirt. His warmth contrasted with the biting storm. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment, though part of her still screamed in warning. Who was he? Why was he here, wandering through a storm at the exact moment she was about to surrender to death? The land blurred as he began to move, each step strong, deliberate. She felt the sway of his stride, the tightness of his grip. Though she wanted to speak, to demand answers, exhaustion swallowed her voice. Instead, she listened. The rain pounding on his hat, the creak of his leather straps, the distant growl of thunder, receding as though it feared this man more than she did. She drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she caught glimpses, lightning striking the horizon, illuminating his face. Scarred, worn, not cruel, but carved by years of hardship. Other times she thought she heard sounds, branches snapping, wolves pacing in the dark. But whenever fear spiked in her chest, his hold tightened, as though he knew her thoughts without words. Time lost meaning. The storm's fury dulled to a heavy drizzle, and the prairie softened into dark woods. Her strength flickered like a candle, and she found herself whispering questions into the folds of his coat. Who are you? Why? Why help me? But no answer came. He moved like a man carrying not just a body but his own shadows, too heavy to name. At last, he stopped. She forced her eyes open, blinking through the blur. He had carried her to a hollow beneath leaning pines, where the ground rose high enough to block the worst of the wind. He lowered her carefully onto a patch of grass, his movements deliberate, precise. His silence pressed against her more than the storm ever had. She wanted to speak again, to demand his name, to ask what kind of safety he promised. But her body refused. The exhaustion was too much, the wound too deep. The last thing she felt was the weight of his coat being draped over her, heavy and warm, shielding her from the cold. His voice came again, softer this time, almost to himself. You're safe now. The words carried her into the dark, where pain gave way to fragile sleep, and uncertainty lingered like the storm still whispering over the plains. The first sensation that returned to her was the ache in her leg. It throbbed like a living fire, spreading with each faint twitch of her muscles. The second sensation was warmth, unfamiliar but steady, press around her shoulders. She opened her eyes to find the stranger's coat draped over her body, its rough fabric soaked from the storm yet holding the lingering heat of his skin. The night had not ended, but the storm had dulled to a whisper of drizzle that tapped faintly on the canopy of pines. She lifted her head slightly and saw him. He sat a short distance away, knees bent, rifle across his lap, his hat pulled low to shadow his eyes. His figure was like carved stone against the dark, unmoving, silent but never relaxed. The air carried the damp musk of pine needles and wet earth, mingled with smoke from a small fire he had coaxed into life. Its faint glow painted him in flickers of orange, sharpening the lines of his face, revealing scars etched into his jaw and brow. They were not the scars of accident, but of violence. She swallowed, tasting the dryness of fear. Her lips parted. You stayed. He did not move at first, then tilted his head slightly, as though the words themselves were unnecessary. His gaze did not leave the dark woods beyond their hollow. Storms passing. Wolves are still near. Fire keeps them back. His voice was low, firm, each word measured. She studied him, though weariness dulled her thoughts. Whoever he was, he carried himself like a man who had known both command and loss. She shifted beneath the coat, wincing as her wound flared. He turned his head at that, eyes meeting hers. For a moment she felt stripped bare under that gaze, but then he looked away, reaching into his pack. From it he drew a small pouch, unwrapping linen to reveal strips of cloth and a small tin. Your leg, he said, needs binding. She hesitated, instinct pressing her to refuse, yet the pain in her body mocked the thought of independence. Her hands trembled as she pulled back her torn skirt, exposing the gash along her thigh. He moved closer, kneeling in the glow of the fire, his large hands unexpectedly careful as he cleaned the wound with cool water from a flask. She bit her lip to silence a cry. You'll walk again, he said. His tone carried neither comfort nor doubt, simply fact. Her eyes lifted to his face, Searching. "Why, help me," she whispered. His hands paused for a fraction of a second, then continued wrapping the linen. He did not answer. When he finished, he tied the bandage with a firm knot, then pulled the coat tighter around her. She wanted to press him further, but exhaustion pressed heavier. The fire's warmth lulled her eyes close again. Before sleep claimed her, she thought she heard him murmur something low, almost too soft to catch. A name, perhaps, or a prayer. She was too far gone to be certain. When dawn broke, the world was washed clean but heavy with mist. She stirred awake to find herself cradled once more in his arms, his stride steady as he moved through the thinning woods. She blinked against the pale light filtering through branches. You should have left me." He glanced down, expression unreadable. "Leaving you would have been a death sentence. That's not mine to give." His words carried no sentiment, yet something inside her tightened at them. She studied the line of his jaw, the weariness in his eyes. He was not young, but not yet old. Perhaps 30, perhaps old if the years had been unkind. His silence weighed heavier than his strength. The land shifted as they traveled. Pines gave way to open stretches where the grass glittered with dew, and the air was sharp with morning chill. In the distance, a hawk circled, its cries slicing through the silence. He moved with relentless pace, carrying her as though her weight was nothing, though she could see the strain in the cords of his neck. At last, he stopped beneath a cluster of rocks that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. He set her down gently, propping her against a stone. Her breath trembled as relief washed through her. "You can't carry me forever," she said. He crouched beside her, adjusting the strap of his rifle. His eyes met Hayes, and for the first time, something softened there. "You'll walk when you're ready. Until then, I carry." She pressed her lips together, the simple conviction in his voice silencing argument. As the days stretched, they continued their path, stopping only when her pain grew unbearable. He scavenged roots, berries, and once brought down a hare with a clean strike of an arrow, surprising her with a bow he carried rolled in his pack. His movements were efficient, practiced, a man who had lived too long with survival as his only companion. He shared everything with her without hesitation, though his own portions were smaller. She watched him often, trying to read the man beyond the silence. Sometimes she caught him staring into the distance with eyes dark as storm clouds, lost in places she could not follow. Other times, when her pain was worst, she felt his gaze on her, steady and unflinching, as though ensuring she did not slip away. By the second night, her strength had returned enough for her to speak more. They sat by the fire, her legs stretched out, his knife glinting as he sharpened it slowly. She gathered courage. "What's your name?" The knife paused against the whetstone. He stared into the flames before answering. "Elias." The name was plain, but it settled into her chest like a stone. She repeated it quietly, as if testing its weight. "Elias." His eyes flicked to hers, then back to the fire. "And you?" "Clara," she said. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of fire. In that moment, the vast wilderness felt less empty. But the reprieve did not last. On the third day, as Elias carried her through a ravine, shadows moved along the ridge above. Clara's breath caught. Figures, 3 of them, rifles glinting in the sun. Bandits. Elias stopped instantly, his grip tightening around her. His voice was a whisper meant only for her. "Stay quiet." The men on the ridge laughed, their voices carrying down like taunts. "What's this? Stranger? Found yourself a prize." Clara's stomach clenched with dread. Elias lowered her carefully against a boulder, then stepped forward, rifle in hand. His stance was calm, but his shoulders were taut with coiled fret. "We're just passing through," he called, voice steady. The bandits chuckled. "Passing through with more than you can handle. Leave the girl, and maybe we let you live." Clara's pulse hammered. She gripped the rock, wishing her legs could carry her. Elias did not move. The silence stretched, thick as rope pulled taut. Then the crack of a rifle split the air. Stone shattered near Elias's head. In an instant, he dropped to one knee, returning fire. The report of his rifle thundered through the ravine. One bandit cried out and tumbled down the ridge. The others scrambled, firing wildly. Clara pressed her hands to her ears, heart pounding as the air filled with smoke and echoes. Elias moved like a man who had lived in gunfire his whole life. He reloaded with ruthless precision, fired again, and another bandit fell. The last cursed, retreating into the ridge shadows. Silence followed, broken only by Clara's ragged breaths. Elias lowered his rifle, scanning the ridge. His face was grim, unreadable. Then he turned back to her, kneeling swiftly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though tears burned her eyes. You could have been killed." His expression softened for the first time, a faint shadow of something almost human in his hardened features. "So could you." He lifted her once more, ignoring the blood smeared across his sleeve from where a bullet had grazed him. As they moved forward, Clara clung to him not just for survival, but with a first fragile thread of trust. That night, as the fire flickered low, Clara found herself watching him as he stitched his own wound with calm brutality. Every pull of the needle made her wince, but he did not flinch. She whispered, almost herself, "Why do you fight for me?" He tied the stitch, cut the thread with his knife, and only then looked at her. "Because someone once fought for me." The answer hung between them, heavy with a story untold. She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she lay back against the blanket he had spread for her, feeling the weight of his words more than the pain in her leg. When sleep came, it was restless, filled with dreams of thunder, wolves, and faceless men with rifles. Yet through it all, there was always a shadow carrying her forward, never letting her fall. By morning, the wound in her leg throbbed but had begun to heal. Elias tested her strength, helping her stand with his arm braced around her. Her legs shook, her breath hitched, but she managed 2 trembling steps. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since the wheel broke on the trail, hope stirred within her. The journey was not over. The wilderness stretched endlessly, dangers lurking in every shadow. Yet with each step, Clara felt the line between her life and death narrowing, defined not by her wound, but by the man who had chosen to carry her through the darkness. The sky burned with a deep red of twilight as Clara leaned against Elias's arm, her steps uneven but determined. Each movement sent a ripple of pain through her healing leg, yet she refused to let him carry her this time. He had carried her far enough. Now she wanted to prove to him, and to herself, that she was more than the weight of her wounds. The wilderness stretched around them, wild and indifferent, its shadows lengthening with the dying light. Elias's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, every rustle of grass and distant call of a crow drawing his attention. He moved with the silent caution of a man who trusted nothing, not even the stillness of evening. Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered close to his rifle. Danger clung to him like a second skin, and she realized with growing certainty that the storm and the bandits had been only preludes to something greater. When the sun dipped behind the hills, they found a narrow valley where a stream cut through the rocks. Elias led her down to the water's edge and knelt to fill his flask. Clara lowered herself onto a stone, exhaling in relief as she stretched her leg. The sound of the stream was gentle, almost soothing, but she could see the sharpness in Elias's movements. His silence was no longer that of a man at rest, but of a man preparing for something inevitable. She broke the quiet. "They'll come back, won't they?" Elias's jaw tightened. He capped the flask and looked at her. Men like that don't forget. They wait, gather, and strike harder. Clara's stomach turned cold. "Then why don't we hide? Find somewhere safer." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "There's no safe in this land. Only strong enough to make it through, or not." His words were harsh, but she sensed the truth in them. Safety had become a fragile illusion the day her wagon broke apart. She lowered her eyes, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Elias crouched before her, his presence filling the space between them. His hand brushed the edge of a bandage, careful but grounding. "You're walking when you should be crawling. That's strength enough." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the broken girl who whispered she could not walk was gone, replaced by someone who could face this merciless world. But the chance to test that came sooner than either of them wished. The first shot rang out as the moon crested the ridge. A crack of gunpowder echoed off the valley walls, and a bullet spat sparks against the stone near Clara's head. She cried out, ducking low. Elias had already thrown himself in front of her, rifle raised. Shadows surged at the ridge above, figures moving with purpose, their voices sharp and cruel. "They found us," Elias muttered. Bandits poured down the slope, rifles flashing in the moonlight, boots crashing against stone. Elias fired, the blast of his rifle dropping the first man before he reached the stream. Clara scrambled behind the boulder, heart hammering, as chaos erupted. Gunfire roared, sparks flew, and the air filled with a stench of smoke and blood. Elias fought with the precision of a man who had done this before, his body moving in brutal efficiency. He fired, reloaded, fired again, each shot striking true. But for every man who fell, more pressed forward. Clara's breath came ragged. She wanted to close her eyes, to shut it out, but something inside her refused. She saw Elias stagger as a bullet grazed his side, so the way his teeth clenched against the pain. He kept fighting, shielding her with his body, but she knew he could not last alone. Her gaze fell on a pistol lying near one of the fallen bandits. Her pulse raced. She had never held a gun, never even thought of it. But Elias's words echoed in her mind, strong enough to make it through, or not. Her body moved before her fear could stop it. Crawling through the date, she seized a pistol with trembling hands. The weight of it shocked her, heavier than she imagined, a cold instrument of life and death. She raised it, her breath shallow, and aimed at the shadow rushing toward Elias's blind side. The shot cracked, jerking her arm back. The bandit spun, collapsing into the stream. Elias turned, eyes flashing with surprise, then with something harder to name, respect, perhaps, or recognition. He gave the faintest nod before turning back to the fight. Together, they pushed back the tide. Clara's shots were clumsy, wild, but enough to slow the advance. Elias's fire was ruthless, his every movement fueled by grim determination. The battle raged until the ground was littered with bodies and the stream ran red with blood. The last of the bandits fled into the night, their curses fading into the distance. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of Elias's labored breath. He dropped to one knee, pressing a hand against the wound in his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining the earth. Clara stumbled toward him, dropping the pistol, her hands shaking. "You're hurt." He looked up at her, face pale in the moonlight, but his eyes steady. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She tore a strip from her skate, pressing it against his wound. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to be steady. "You carried me through storms and wolves and worse. Let me carry you now." For the first time since she had met him, his lips curved in the ghost of a smile. It was faint, fleeting, but it softened the lines of his hardened face. "Stubborn," he murmured, "like I was told once, strong enough." Taze pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. She refused to let him see her as weak again. She tied the makeshift bandage tightly, even as he winced at the pressure. They sat together by the stream, the bodies of their enemies scattered around them, the moonlight silver on the water. Clara leaned against him, exhaustion pressing down, but a strange peace settling in her chest. They had survived, though the cost was carved into their wounds and the silence of the valley. After a long time, Elias spoke, his voice low. "I wasn't always like this." She turned to him, surprised. He stared into the distance, eyes shadowed. "Once I had a family, a wife, a little girl with hair like sunlight. I went to fight in the war, thought I was protecting them. Came back to ashes. Raiders burned the farm, left nothing but graves." His jaw tightened. "Since then, I've wondered, carried the weight. Never thought I'd have reason to stop." Clara's heart hated his words. She reached for his hand, gripping it despite the calluses and scars. "You carried me when I was nothing but weight. Maybe it's time you stopped wondering." His eyes flicked to haze, searching, uncertain. She held his gaze, her voice steady despite the tears threatening. "You said I was safe now, and you were right, because you were there. But maybe you need someone to tell you the same." The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then, slowly, Elias squeezed a hand. They sat together until dawn broke, the first light spilling across the valley, washing the bloodstains into shadows. Clara's leg ached, his wound throbbed, but they rose together, leaning on each other. The path ahead was unknown, But for the first time, it did not feel like death waiting at the end. Elias adjusted his rifle, then looked at her with quiet resolve. "You're safe now. Always." And for the first time since the wheel shattered on the trail, Clara believed it.